My parents spent my college fund on my sister's wedding. Joke's on them. I got a full scholarship they knew nothing about. Growing up, I always knew my sister was the golden child. She was 2 years older, got better grades in elementary school, and somehow managed to charm everyone around her. My parents constantly reminded me how proud they were of her achievements, while my accomplishments seemed to fade into the background like yesterday's newspaper. When I was 12, my dad sat me down and explained how they'd been saving money for both of us to go to college. He showed me this little savings book where they tracked every deposit, every birthday gift from grandparents, every tax return that got tucked away. The numbers weren't huge, but seeing that steady growth over the years gave me this warm feeling that my future mattered to them. My sister went off to college first, and suddenly the house felt different. Quieter, but also somehow more relaxed. Without her constant presence, I found myself actually having conversations with my parents instead of just listening to them praise her latest achievement. I started working harder in school, not because I was trying to compete with her memory, but because I finally had space to discover what I was actually good at. That's when I fell in love with mathematics. Not the boring algebra stuff, but the way numbers could tell stories, solve puzzles, create patterns that felt almost magical. I spent hours after school working through problems that weren't even assigned, just because I enjoyed the challenge. My grades shot up, and for the first time, I felt like I had something that was truly mine. When my sister came home for winter break during my sophomore year, she brought her boyfriend along. He seemed nice enough, though he had this way of finishing her sentences that made me wonder if she ever got to complete her own thoughts. My parents loved him immediately, probably because he laughed at all of my dad's terrible jokes and complimented my mom's cooking like he'd never tasted anything so amazing. By spring, they were engaged. The announcement came during a family dinner, and I watched my parents practically vibrate with excitement. My mom started crying happy tears, my dad started talking about planning the perfect wedding, and I sat there wondering when exactly I'd become invisible again. The wedding planning consumed our house for the next year and a half. Every conversation somehow circled back to flowers, venues, guest lists, and catering options. I learned more about the difference between ivory and cream than any teenage boy should ever know. My sister would call almost daily with some new crisis or decision that needed the entire family's input, and somehow my homework or school projects always seemed to get interrupted for these emergency wedding consultations. I didn't mind the chaos too much, honestly. It gave me more time to focus on my own stuff without anyone paying attention to what I was doing. I joined the math team, started tutoring younger kids, and even began working on some independent research projects that my teacher said were college-level work. But whenever I tried to share these victories at dinner, someone would inevitably redirect the conversation back to whether the wedding cake should have 3 tiers or 4. The real shock came during the spring of my junior year. I was sitting at the kitchen table working on a particularly challenging calculus problem when my parents sat down across from me with serious expressions. My mom was fidgeting with her wedding ring, and my dad kept clearing his throat like he was preparing for a big speech. They explained that the wedding was going to cost more than they'd initially planned. Much more. The venue they'd chosen was expensive, and my sister had her heart set on this elaborate celebration that would give her the perfect day she'd dreamed about since childhood. They'd looked at their finances and realized they needed to make some difficult choices. The college fund would have to be redirected to cover the wedding expenses. All of it. They assured me that they'd help me apply for financial aid, and that community college was a perfectly respectable option for the first 2 years. I could transfer to a 4-year school later, maybe even the state university if I kept my grades up. I sat there nodding and telling them I understood, while inside I felt like someone had just told me that Christmas was canceled forever. All those years of watching that savings account grow, all those conversations about my future, all those dreams of attending a good college and studying advanced mathematics, gone in one conversation to pay for flowers and a DJ and a dress that would be worn for exactly one day. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and feeling this weird mix of anger and determination. I was mad at my parents for making this choice, mad at my sister for being so expensive, and mad at myself for being surprised by any of it. But underneath the anger was something else, a stubborn refusal to let this derail everything I'd been working toward. I started researching scholarships with the intensity of someone planning a military campaign. I filled out applications for every program I could find, wrote essay after essay about my goals and achievements, and asked my teachers for recommendation letters without explaining why I suddenly needed so many of them. I told my parents I was working on college applications, which was technically true, but I didn't mention that I was focusing exclusively on schools with full-ride scholarship programs. The math team started doing really well that year. We won the regional competition, placed second at state, and I personally scored high enough to qualify for some national competitions. My coach started talking about how colleges would be fighting over me, but I just smiled and nodded without mentioning that I'd already applied to most of them. Spring brought a flurry of wedding preparations and college acceptance letters. My sister's dress arrived and required 3 fittings to get perfect. The florist had to be changed twice because the first 2 couldn't guarantee the exact shade of roses she wanted. Meanwhile, my mailbox filled with envelopes from universities, most of them offering partial scholarships that would still leave me tens of thousands of dollars in debt. But then came the letter that changed everything. It was from a prestigious university about 3 hours away, known for having one of the best mathematics programs in the country. I'd applied for their merit scholarship program on a whim, figuring I had nothing to lose. The letter was thick, which was usually a good sign, but I'd gotten my hopes up and had them crushed enough times that I tried not to expect anything. The scholarship was full ride. Everything. Tuition, room, board, books, even a small stipend for personal expenses. They'd been impressed by my academic record, my research projects, and my performance in mathematics competitions. They wanted me to join their honors program and work with faculty on advanced research starting my freshman year. I read that letter about 5 times before the reality sank in. I was going to college. Not just any college, but a really good one. And I was going to study exactly what I wanted to study, with professors who were excited about the same things that fascinated me. My parents' choice hadn't destroyed my future after all. It had just motivated me to create a better one than I'd originally planned. The tricky part was deciding when and how to tell my family. The wedding was only 6 weeks away, and every conversation in our house revolved around final preparations. My sister was stressed about everything from the weather forecast to whether her future in-laws would like the menu. My parents were juggling vendor calls and trying to coordinate relatives traveling from across the country. I almost told them several times, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way they kept apologizing for the college fund situation, like they expected me to be grateful for their sacrifice. Maybe it was the way my sister kept talking about how this would be the most important day of her life, as if nothing else that happened to our family could possibly matter as much. Or maybe I was just enjoying having this secret, this proof that I could take care of myself even when they couldn't take care of me. The wedding day arrived with all the chaos and emotion you'd expect. My sister looked genuinely beautiful, and her happiness was so radiant that even I had to admit the whole expensive production was worth it to see her so joyful. My parents were practically glowing with pride and relief that everything was going smoothly. During the reception, my dad pulled me aside and told me how proud he was of how mature I'd been about the college situation. He promised they'd help me figure out community college in the fall, and that we'd make sure I got the education I deserved, even if it took a little longer than originally planned. I almost told him right then. The words were right there, ready to spill out. But something about the way he said it, like he was doing me this huge favor by promising to help me with a backup plan, made me want to hold on to my secret a little longer. 2 weeks after the wedding, I was helping my mom clean up the last of the decorations when she found the scholarship letter. I'd left it on my desk, and she'd gone into my room to collect laundry. She came downstairs holding the letter with this confused expression, like she'd found evidence of some crime, but couldn't figure out what law had been broken. She called my dad over, and they both read it together, their expressions shifting from confusion to surprise to something that looked almost like disappointment. Not disappointment in me, but disappointment that they'd been left out of something so important. My dad asked why I hadn't told them, and I honestly didn't know how to answer. I'd been planning this dramatic revelation where I'd announce my scholarship and watch their faces light up with pride and relief. But sitting there in our living room, surrounded by leftover wedding decorations and the lingering scent of my sister's bouquet, the whole thing felt smaller and more complicated than I'd imagined. I explained about the applications, the research, the competitions that had made me eligible for the scholarship. I told them about the honors program and the research opportunities, about how this was actually a better outcome than what the original college fund would have provided. I thought they'd be excited, maybe even impressed by my initiative and determination. Instead, They seemed hurt. My mom kept asking why I'd felt like I couldn't share this with them, why I'd let them worry about my future when I'd already secured it. My dad wanted to know if I didn't trust them, if I thought they wouldn't support my achievements. The conversation got awkward fast. They weren't wrong to feel left out, but I wasn't wrong to feel abandoned when they'd redirected my college fund without asking how I felt about it. We were all right and all wrong at the same time, which is probably the most frustrating kind of family conflict. Over the next few weeks, the initial hurt faded into something more complicated. My parents were genuinely proud of my scholarship, and they started telling relatives and family friends about it with the same enthusiasm they'd shown for my sister's wedding. But there was also this underlying tension, like they were proud of me, but also suspicious that I might have other secrets they didn't know about. My sister's reaction was the most surprising. When she heard about the scholarship, she actually seemed upset that I'd achieved something significant during what she considered her special time. She made comments about how I'd always been jealous of her, and how I'd probably applied for the scholarship just to steal attention from her wedding. The accusation was so ridiculous that I couldn't even get mad about it. But what bothered me more was realizing that she genuinely believed the world revolved around her experiences. The idea that I might have my own goals and achievements that had nothing to do with her apparently hadn't occurred to her. It was like discovering that someone you'd lived with your whole life was actually a stranger. Summer passed in a weird limbo. I was excited about college, but felt disconnected from my family in a way I'd never experienced before. My parents kept trying to insert themselves into my college preparations, offering advice about dorm life and study habits like they were experts on the university I'd be attending. My sister kept making comments about how I was lucky to be getting a free ride, as if luck had anything to do with the years of hard work that had earned me the scholarship. The strangest part was how my perspective on the whole college fund situation had shifted. What had initially felt like a betrayal now seemed like an unexpected gift. Being forced to take responsibility for my own future had led me to opportunities one never would have discovered otherwise. The scholarship wasn't just paying for my education. It was proof that I could succeed on my own terms, without waiting for someone else to make my dreams possible. When I finally left for college, the goodbye was more emotional than I'd expected. Despite all the tension and hurt feelings, these were still my parents, and I still loved them. My mom cried. My dad gave me about 17 different pieces of advice about managing money and staying safe, and even my sister seemed genuinely sad to see me go. College was everything I'd hoped it would be and more. The mathematics program was challenging but not overwhelming, and the professors treated me like a junior colleague rather than just another student. I made friends who shared my interests, joined study groups that felt more like collaborative research teams, and discovered that I had a talent for explaining complex concepts in ways that helped other people understand them. But the best part was the freedom. Freedom to choose my own schedule, my own friends, my own goals. Freedom to succeed or fail based on my own efforts rather than my family's expectations or limitations. Freedom to be proud of myself without worrying about whether my achievements were overshadowing someone else's moment. During winter break, I came home with stories about my classes, my research project, and my plans for the upcoming semester. My parents listened with genuine interest, and I could see they were starting to understand that my independence wasn't a rejection of them. It was a natural result of the values they'd actually taught me, even if they hadn't realized they were teaching them. My sister was pregnant by then, and the family attention had shifted to planning for the baby. She seemed happier and more relaxed than she'd been during the wedding planning, and she actually asked thoughtful questions about my college experience. It was like pregnancy had given her a new perspective on what really mattered. The conversation about the college fund finally happened during that winter break. My dad brought it up over dinner, admitting that he'd been thinking about their decision and wondering if they'd made the right choice. He wasn't apologizing exactly, but he was acknowledging that the situation had been more complicated than they'd initially realized. I told them what I'd learned about myself through the whole experience. How being forced to take responsibility for my own future had taught me skills I never would have developed otherwise. How the scholarship had opened doors that the original college fund never could have. How their decision, while painful at the time, had actually led to a better outcome than anyone could have predicted. My mom started crying, but they were good tears this time. She said she was proud of how I'd handled everything, but also sorry that I'd had to handle it alone. My dad nodded and said he was learning that sometimes the best thing parents can do is get out of their kids' way and let them figure things out. The spring semester brought new challenges and opportunities. I was selected for a summer research program that would pay me to work with a professor on a project related to my interests. I was also invited to present my work at a national conference, which felt like a huge validation of everything I'd been working toward. When I called home with the news, my parents were genuinely excited. Not the polite enthusiasm they'd shown for my achievements in the past, but real excitement about my success. They asked detailed questions about the research, the conference, and my plans for the future. It felt like they were finally seeing me as an individual rather than just their younger child. My sister had her baby that spring, and suddenly our family dynamics shifted again. She was focused on motherhood with the same intensity she'd brought to wedding planning. But this time her obsession felt more meaningful. My parents were thrilled to be grandparents, and watching them interact with the baby reminded me why I'd always loved them, even when they frustrated me. The baby also seemed to give my sister a new perspective on family relationships. She apologized for some of the things she'd said during the wedding period, acknowledging that she'd been so focused on her own experience that she'd forgotten other people had their own lives and goals. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation, but it was a start. As my sophomore year began, I realized that the college fund incident had become a turning point for our entire family. Not because it had torn us apart, but because it had forced all of us to grow up in different ways. My parents learned to trust my judgment and respect my independence. My sister learned that she wasn't the center of the universe, and I learned that I was capable of creating my own opportunities, even when the path I'd planned was blocked. The scholarship continued to exceed my expectations. I was invited to join additional research projects, offered tutoring positions that helped other students while developing my own teaching skills, and connected with professors who became mentors rather than just instructors. By the end of my sophomore year, I had a clear vision of what I wanted to do after graduation and the confidence to pursue it. More importantly, I'd learned that family relationships don't have to be perfect to be valuable. My parents had made a decision that hurt me, but they'd also raised me to be resilient and resourceful. My sister had been self-centered and demanding, but she'd also shown me the importance of advocating for what you want. Our family had been tested by competing priorities and limited resources, but we'd emerged stronger and more honest with each other. The college fund that had been spent on my sister's wedding had been replaced by something much more valuable, the knowledge that I could create my own future, regardless of what obstacles appeared in my path. The scholarship was just the beginning of that journey, not the destination. Looking back now, I'm actually grateful for the way things worked out. Not because I enjoyed the stress and disappointment at the time, but because those experiences taught me lessons I never would have learned if everything had gone according to plan. Sometimes the best gifts come disguised as problems, and sometimes the most important growth happens when you're forced to find your own way forward. The wedding was beautiful, my sister was happy, and my parents got to feel proud of the celebration they provided. But I got something better, the confidence to build the life I wanted, with or without anyone else's help. And that, it turns out, was worth more than any college fund ever could have been.